Joining me in the studio is the political campaigner Vava Tampa. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. As we heard in the package, earlier reports suggested that the EU was going to implement quotas on countries. Well, now the EU Commissioner for Migration is saying there is no fixed plan to relocate these 40,000 migrants, and countries will have to decide by themselves how many people they want to relocate. Do you get the feeling that suddenly it's turned into a mixed message?
Well, it really is. I mean, essentially, Europe has becoming a different continent. Immigration has been argued. It's not an issue which gets people elected in office. In fact, with the growth of the far-right movement in France, in the UK, in Germany and so forth, immigration is becoming a contentious issue. So essentially, the EU does not want to be seen as sort of this big institution imposing on smaller states to take on immigrants, which those states do not want to take. And the Commission essentially is powerless. Whichever proposal put forward, it would be vetoed by the Council of Europe, which, Prime Ministers and Presidents sit and meet and decide policies.
So as you correctly pointed out, this is obviously a politically difficult issue for many EU countries, not least because they face pressures at home from anti-immigration parties and from their own populations about taking in immigrant arrivals during what many see as tough economic times.
Well, that's another element. The economies of European countries have not yet improved. There is shortages of work and employment, and having sort of newcomers in the tens of thousands in your countries is not something anyone wants to see in their countries. So there is that element. But above all, I mean, one of the key elements here is essentially where does it stop, where does it end? Because every country knows, Britain, the French, the Germans actually understand, okay, taking 10,000 or 20,000, this is simply, the starting point. Until and unless the issues, Libya is sorted out, nothing is going to change. So how many are we going to be asked to take on, or how many, I should say, European countries are going to be asked to take on?
So given that, of course, they now have the option of taking in as many as they want, does that mean that they might have the option of not taking in any at all? In other words, is this proposal likely to be welcomed by no one apart from the migrants themselves?
Well, this is a proposal, and that's what it is, a proposal. We haven't seen anything concrete in terms of politics that shows that countries or leaders want somehow to take on a large amount of numbers of immigrants in their countries. Germany has taken a largest number. I think Germany would retain the larger number of people they've already taken. The French have taken a larger number, Italy and few others. I think Britain would continue to remain sort of out of this proposal, as well as other Eastern European countries. So it is a proposal, and it will remain a proposal until we see some sort of miracles in terms of political attitude in Europe.
So might there be a way around that by, for instance, the EU cracking down on the smugglers themselves?
Well, all of those, I mean, it sounds easy to say, but it's not easy to implement. How do you identify those smugglers? Libya is a country ruled and run by warlords, and those warlords have their hands essentially in smuggling people. So how do you identify which ship or which boat is a fishing boat and which one is being used to sort of smuggle immigrants in high seas? So there are all of those are contentious issues. And do we want, actually, are we asking for the European countries to send a military force on the coast of Libya to go and take on those people at gunpoint? Is that what we are asking European countries to do?
So do you envisage that a way around this might well be the sense of guilt that, for instance, the Italians and the Greeks have taken in quite a lot of people, and it's not really fair on them, and that perhaps, other countries should take in a few more?
Well, if countries behaved morally, then we could have seen a swift solution out of this crisis from that perspective. But disappointing politics is a zero-sum game. So no one, definitely not the UK, definitely not the French or the German, would want to take on more refugees from the Greek or the Italian.
What's the situation in these camps? I mean, because presumably there's not enough water and not enough toilets for all those tens of thousands of people who are housed there.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people now And the situation, the problem with crisis is no one knows when it's going to happen. And when it happens, when people flood your country, you are unprepared, these issues tend to happen. So Tanzania finds itself in a very difficult situation, having to deal with 100,000 people,
and the other
overcrowded.
Absolutely. The other important question is, of course, that nobody knows when it's going to end.
Well, it's not even going to end by the looks of things on the ground in Burundi, because essentially the president continues. He wants to go ahead with the election. He wants to remain president. And you have the army divided. There's been bouts of killings in different parts of the country. So we will see more and more people leaving Burundi for Tanzania, for Congo and Uganda and many other parts of Africa.
So is it all a wait-and-see approach, or do you detect considerable eagerness to return home on the part of the refugees?
Well, the vast majority, from what I've read, the vast majority of the refugees are Tutsis. And the reason the vast majority are Tutsis is because the Tutsis are the minority in Burundi, and Burundi has had this incredibly violent history of conflict between the Hutus, who are the majority, and the Tutsis, who are the minorities. Now, they are misled by the Tutsis, and the guy who attempted to overthrow the president is a Tutsi. So there has been an attempt on some sort of retaliation of the Tutsi minority in Burundi. So the vast majority are Tutsi, and I don't think they will go back until they are absolutely certain that there is some sort of peace and stability back in their homes and communities.
Now, East African leaders will meet on Sunday at a special summit to discuss the crisis in Burundi. Can anything come from that?
I doubt it very much, for the simplest reason. As you and I speak, Rwanda's parliament is debating whether or not Kagame should be given an option to run for the third term, which is the same thing which Pierre Nkurunziza wants. Uganda is doing the same thing. And Congo, my own country, wants the same thing. So I doubt that those leaders who want to run for the third terms would somehow prevent their fellow dictator to, not to run for a third terms. So nothing significant would come from the meeting, apart from perhaps giving more assistance, more aid to support refugees.
Meanwhile, a humanitarian crisis breaking out. We're told that one village where the cholera disease broke out had just 10,000 people before it was suddenly besieged by 45,000 refugees who landed there from Burundi. And of course, not enough water, as we said, not toilets to cater for such numbers. And that is how cholera broke out. And now they've got more than 4,000 people affected by the disease. The question is, do the aid agencies and the Tanzanian government have the resources and the facilities to cope?
Tanzania is overwhelmed. Tanzania, before this new wave of refugees coming to Tanzania, they were already dealing with the large number of refugees from Congo, fleeing conflict in Congo, and refugees from other parts of the world. So Tanzania is incredibly overwhelmed, and aid agencies were not prepared for this crisis. So we need to see the international community stepping up, providing the support, providing the assistance, which we need to prevent a further loss of lives.
Vava, thanks very much indeed. The political campaigner, Vava Tampa there.